Welcome to Blueprint Viral News, where we break down the latest Canada popular vote projection for January 26, 2025. From coast to coast, let's dive into how the political landscape is shifting across the 343 electoral districts. We'll be covering the Conservative, Liberal, NDP, and Green Party standings and the tight races across key provinces and territories. Let's dive in. In Nunavut, the New Democratic Party, NDP, is currently the frontrunner, polling at 49%, but with a 15% margin of error. This means their actual level of support could be anywhere between 34% and 64%, indicating a solid lead, but also some uncertainty due to the relatively small sample size in the region. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, and the Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, are tied at 23% each, with the Liberals having a 13% margin of error and the Conservatives a 12% margin of error. This means their actual vote shares could range from as low as 10% to as high as 36% for the Liberals and 11% to 35% for the Conservatives. Given this overlap, there is a possibility that one of these parties could still overtake the other, depending on voter shifts. The Green Party of Canada, GPC, sits at 3%, with a 5% margin of error, meaning their actual vote share could be between 0% and 8%. This suggests that while they have some presence in Nunavut, they are unlikely to be a major contender in the race. In the Northwest Territories, the race remains highly competitive and unpredictable, with no clear frontrunner. The NDP, Liberals, and Conservatives are all polling within each other's margin of error, making this a true three-way toss-up, where even small shifts in voter preferences could determine the winner. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is currently in the lead with 34%, but the 11% margin of error means their actual support could range from 23% to 45%. While this puts them slightly ahead, it does not guarantee victory, as both the Liberals and Conservatives remain well within striking distance. The Liberal Party, LPC, is close behind at 32%, just 2 points behind the NDP. With the same 11% margin of error, their actual vote share could be between 21% and 43%. Notably, their support is trending upward, indicating growing momentum. If this trend continues, they could surpass the NDP and take the lead before Election Day. The Conservative Party, CPC, is polling at 28%, slightly behind the NDP and Liberals. With a 10% margin of error, their support could range from 18% to 38%. While currently in third place, they are still within range of an upset, particularly if they gain last-minute support or if voter turnout benefits them. The Green Party, GPC, is polling at 5%, with a 6% margin of error, meaning their actual support could be anywhere between 0% and 11%. While they are not a major contender in this race, their presence could influence the outcome by drawing votes from other parties. In Yukon, the Conservative Party, CPC, is currently leaning toward a lead, with 37% of voter support. However, it's important to consider that their margin of error is 10%, meaning their actual support could range anywhere between 27% and 47%. This relatively wide margin of error indicates that while the CPC is in the front position at the moment, their lead is not absolute, and the final numbers could shift as the election approaches. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is in second place with 30% of the vote. Their margin of error is 9%, which means their true support could range from 21% to 39%. The NDP has a solid base in this race, and given their proximity to the Conservatives, this district could still see significant movement. Factors like candidate popularity, local issues, or shifts in public opinion could easily change the outcome in the coming weeks. The Liberal Party, LPC, is trailing behind at 26%, with a margin of error of 9%, placing their support somewhere between 17% and 35%. While the Liberal Party is not in the lead, their numbers suggest that they still have a viable path forward. particularly if they can mobilize their base or capitalize on any shifts in voter sentiment. Historically, the Liberals have had strong performance in certain urban areas, and they may be able to close the gap with effective campaigning. The Green Party, GPC, with 6% of the vote, holds a relatively small share of the support, though their margin of error is 6%, meaning their actual support could range from 0% to 12%. While the Greens are not likely to secure a seat in this race, they could still play an influential role, particularly by affecting the conversation around environmental policies or by influencing the overall dynamics of voter turnout. In British Columbia, which includes 43 districts, the Conservative Party CPC is currently leading with 49% of voter support. However, their margin of error is 6%, meaning their actual support could range from 43% to 55%. This solid lead positions the CPC as a strong contender in the province, reflecting their strength in both rural and suburban areas. Despite this, the margin of error suggests that a shift in voter sentiment could still impact their position. The New Democratic Party, NDP, follows with 24% of the vote, although their support has dipped compared to previous trends. With a margin of error of 5%, this means the NDP's actual support could range from 19% to 29%. While the NDP remains a significant player in British Columbia, their lower share of support indicates that the CPC has widened their lead, and the NDP's traditional base in urban areas like Vancouver has not been enough to challenge the Conservatives in this cycle. The Liberal Party, LPC, sits at 18%, with a margin of error of 4%, placing their support between 14% and 22%. The Liberals have traditionally done well in British Columbia's urban centers, but their current standing reflects a weaker position compared to their historic performance. A combination of factors, including shifting voter priorities and the LPC's challenges in a province where the CPC and NDP are dominant, could explain the dip in their numbers. The Green Party, GPC, holds 6%, with a margin of error of 3%, meaning their support could range from 3% to 9%. The Greens are still a presence in British Columbia, especially in more environmentally conscious areas, but they remain a distant fourth in terms of voter support. Their influence may be more significant in certain ridings, but they are unlikely to challenge the top three parties in the overall race. In Alberta, the Conservative Party, CPC, is firmly in control, with a commanding 63% of voter support. With a margin of error of 6%, this means the CPC's actual support could range from 57% to 69%, further emphasizing their strong dominance in the province. Alberta has long been a Conservative stronghold, and these numbers underscore the CPC's continued appeal in both rural and urban areas, particularly in the oil-rich regions where economic policies align closely with Conservative values. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is far behind, holding 18% of the vote with a margin of error of 4%, suggesting their true support could range from 14% to 22%. While the NDP has made inroads in some urban areas, especially in the Edmonton region, their presence in Alberta remains limited. The province's conservative-leaning voters, combined with strong CPC campaigns, have kept the NDP from making significant headway. The Liberal Party, LPC, is even further behind, with 12% support and a margin of error of 4%, placing their actual backing between 8% and 16%. The Liberals have struggled to gain traction in Alberta, where their policies often clash with the more conservative political culture. The LPC remains a distant third, particularly as voters in Alberta tend to gravitate toward the CPC or NDP based on regional and economic issues. In Alberta, the political landscape continues to be overwhelmingly conservative, leaving little room for the NDP or Liberals to mount a serious challenge. With 63% of the vote, the CPC is not only maintaining but strengthening its position. Given the provincial context, it's clear that Alberta will continue to be a bedrock of Conservative support in the coming election. and it's unlikely that other parties will be able to make significant gains in this cycle. In the prairies, which comprises 28 districts, the Conservative Party, CPC, remains firmly in control with 56% of voter support. With a margin of error of 6%, this means the CPC's true support could range from 50% to 62%, reinforcing their strong position across this region. The CPC's dominance is largely driven by their appeal in rural areas, where agricultural and energy policies align closely with conservative values. Their continued strength in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and parts of Alberta contributes to their solid grip on this part of the country. The New Democratic Party, NDP, follows in second place with 20% of the vote, though their margin of error is 5%, which means their actual support could range from 15% to 25%. The NDP continues to find support, especially in urban centers like Winnipeg, but they remain well behind the CPC in most of the prairie provinces. Their position is more stable in some specific areas, but they still face challenges in surpassing the Conservatives in this region. The Liberal Party, LPC, is in third place with 16%, and their margin of error of 4% puts their true support between 12% and 20%. The Liberals have slightly increased their standing compared to past cycles, but they are still well behind both the CPC and NDP. While they are making some gains, particularly in urban areas, the Liberals face significant barriers in gaining broader support across the region, where the CPC and NDP dominate the political discourse. The CPC continues to hold a commanding lead in the prairies, with 56% support, reflecting their strong foothold in this traditionally conservative region. While the NDP has a solid presence, particularly in urban areas, and the Liberals have made slight gains, the Conservatives' lead remains significant, and it's unlikely that either of the other parties will be able to unseat them here in the upcoming election. In Ontario, the largest province with 122 districts, the Conservative Party, CPC, currently leads with 48% of the vote. With a margin of error of 6%, this places their true support anywhere between 42% and 54%, maintaining a strong position. The CPC has been performing well in many suburban and rural areas, where their economic policies and stance on issues like taxation and energy resonate with voters. They continue to be the dominant force in the province, particularly in parts of the Greater Toronto Area, GTA, and outside major urban centers. However, the Liberal Party, LPC, has gained some ground, sitting at 26% with a margin of error of 5%. This means their support could range from 21% to 31%, showing a slight increase from previous projections. The Liberals are benefiting from stronger performances in urban areas like Toronto and Ottawa, where they traditionally do well. This growth in urban support has allowed them to narrow the gap between themselves and the CPC, making Ontario a more competitive battleground. The New Democratic Party, NDP, holds 19% of the vote, with a margin of error of 4%, which means their actual support could range from 15% to 23%. While the NDP has a solid base, especially in working-class neighborhoods and certain urban districts, they still trail behind both the CPC and Liberals. The party has found some success in more progressive areas, but faces challenges in breaking through against the other two major parties. The Green Party, GPC, holds 4%, with a margin of error of 3%, suggesting their true support could range from 1% to 7%. While their numbers are relatively small, the Greens continue to influence conversations around environmental policy, and their supporters could play a role in shaping key issues in Ontario. In Quebec, the Bloc Québécois, BQ, continues to lead with 35% of the vote, although their support has dipped slightly by 5%, meaning their actual support could range from 30% to 40%. The BQ remains a dominant force in the province, benefiting from a strong connection to Quebec's unique identity and focus on provincial autonomy. Their appeal is particularly pronounced in rural areas and regions with a strong cultural and linguistic connection to Quebec's separatist ideals. Despite the slight dip in their numbers, They are still in a commanding position, but the race is far from over, especially with competition from the Federalist parties. The Conservative Party, CPC, follows with 26% support, and their margin of error is 5%, meaning their actual backing could range from 21% to 31%. The CPC has been making significant strides in Quebec, particularly among voters who are disillusioned with traditional federal parties and are looking for an alternative to the BQ. Their platform, which emphasizes fiscal conservatism, national unity, and a strong stance on immigration, resonates with a segment of Quebec's electorate, though they still trail behind the BQ. The Liberal Party, LPC, holds 21% of the vote, with a margin of error of 5%, placing their true support between 16% and 26%. The Liberals are traditionally strong in urban areas like Montreal, but their numbers have been affected by increasing competition from the BQ on the left and the CPC on the right. As a Federalist party, the LPC is vying for votes from those who prefer maintaining close ties with the rest of Canada, but their share of the vote is increasingly challenged by Quebec's rising nationalism and the appeal of the BQ. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is in fourth place with 11%, and their margin of error is 3%, suggesting their support could range from 8% to 14%. The NDP has historically had pockets of support in Quebec, particularly among younger and progressive voters. However, they are struggling to make significant inroads against the BQ's entrenched position and the growing competition from both Federalist parties. The Green Party, GPC, has 3% of the vote, with a margin of error of 2%, placing their true support between 1% and 5%. The Greens continue to have a niche presence in Quebec, particularly in urban areas where environmental issues are a priority, but their influence remains limited. In Atlantic Canada, the Conservative Party, CPC, holds 46% of the vote, although this is a slight drop with a margin of error of 6%, meaning their actual support could range from 40% to 52%. While the CPC maintains a lead, their margin of error suggests that their dominance in the region is not as solid as it once seemed. Atlantic Canada, traditionally a stronghold for the Liberals, has seen a shift toward conservative support in recent years, especially in areas like Newfoundland and Labrador and parts of Nova Scotia. The CPC's focus on economic policies, fiscal conservatism, and regional development has resonated with many voters in the region, but they are facing increasing competition from the Liberals, especially in key urban centers. Liberal Party, LPC, follows with 30% of the vote, with a margin of error of 6%, placing their true support between 24% and 36%. The Liberals have a solid presence in Atlantic Canada, particularly in Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador, where they are known for policies that support social programs, healthcare, and regional investment. The LPC has made some gains over the last few cycles, positioning themselves as a strong alternative to the CPC. Their policies on climate change and social welfare are resonating with many voters in the region, especially in urban and suburban districts. The New Democratic Party, NDP, holds 17% of the vote, with a margin of error of 4%, suggesting their support could range from 13% to 21%. While the NDP has made some inroads in Atlantic Canada, particularly in more progressive communities, their support remains relatively low compared to the CPC and Liberals. The NDP continues to advocate for stronger social policies and environmental reforms, but they are struggling to win over voters who traditionally lean towards either the Liberals or CPC in this region. The Green Party, GPC, holds 4%, with a margin of error of 2%, indicating their true support could range from 2% to 6%. The Greens have a niche but stable base in Atlantic Canada, particularly in Prince Edward Island and parts of Nova Scotia, where environmental concerns are a high priority. However, their influence in the broader region is limited, and they continue to play a minor role in the political landscape of Atlantic Canada. That wraps up our look at the Canada popular vote projection as of January 26, 2025. From coast to coast, it's clear that the Conservatives hold strong in many regions, but the Liberals and NDP are still making their presence felt. With tight races in key provinces and territories, this election is shaping up to be one to watch. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay updated on all the latest political developments, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share my channel. Your support helps bring the latest news and insights right to you. Thanks for tuning in to Blueprint Viral News.